Okay. All right, let me just share my screen and we'll get started. And I see that there are other questions coming in the chat. And so, okay, they're getting answered. Great. All right. First, I just want to acknowledge you're getting a lot of information today, and this will be another load of new information. And I just want to make sure know that no one is expecting that you remember every single thing you hear. Hopefully you'll catch like half of it, and then you can always come back to us with questions later. And all of the handouts and slide decks and recordings will all be on our website within the next few days, and we will also send them out through the newsletter. So you'll have all of this. So don't feel like you have to remember everything. Just take in the points that are the most resonant for you right now. You can take in the rest later. And you all should know about the PTA president listserv. We have a few different listservs for the district PTA for all of the unit officers to connect with each other, but we do have the president listserv. It's been really wonderful to see so many of you communicating with each other and sharing ideas and bouncing things off of each other. So please keep using that. And if you are not on it, or you know that your president isn't, then please, of course, let us know about that. So this presentation is, it's for PTA presidents, but really anybody on the PTA board can benefit from this information. It's just sort of an overview of some tips that we all have learned over the years. So I'm going to start first with this idea that you follow the calendar. And so as a president, you want to think of yourself really as a coordinator of the work and the official spokesperson and representative of the organization. And you should not do everything yourself. That is a really quick recipe for burning yourself out. And you want to build an infrastructure around you that can continue on after you leave. So like sometimes I think we've all seen PTAs in schools where we have a really dynamic leader and then they leave and everything falls apart. So we have to build the capacity of our PTAs to keep going, even if we are not the only person there. So in your job description, you should already know that it's your job to appoint all of the chair people and committee members. Practically, most people, most units will solicit names. Maybe when you're doing the nomination process in the spring, you'll get an idea of who's interested in doing certain things, or people will suggest names. And so it's from both your board and from the general membership. And so it's great to just go with those suggestions unless there's a good reason not to. It feels more inclusive than you just sort of anointing people. Find out who's interested and build the leadership in your school. So I'm going to ask I don't know if Melissa has done this yet, but I asked her if she could post a link in the chat. We have put together this calendar for you all that would be a great guide for you on what needs to happen during different months throughout the year. It gives the basic deadlines for some of those requirements from the state PTA when you have to submit your taxes, or you have to have certain membership numbers sent in and submitted so that you're submitting your dues through the district. If they're, when we have the Reflections Art program, when that deadline is happening, when you need to start your nominating procedures and form that committee so they can going in the spring. We have all of that in this calendar, so it can be a good outline for you to follow. And we did try to include the things that I would call the most basic. Sometimes we talk about kind of that triage effect that you have in your schools, where you may not have a lot of officers and you can only do the things you must do. And so we have those things in this calendar. And then there are also a few other things just to keep in mind and help keep you on track. There is also in that list, you'll see a checklist of things that outgoing officers needed to do before the school year started. And so just look through that list. Maybe there are a few things that weren't done and you can take care of them now. Things like getting new signers on your PTA's bank account is an example of that. So hopefully that is a helpful resource for you. Okay, knowing how to lead an effective meeting. It's always helpful when they feel like they're organized and they're running smoothly, right? So Here's a few things to remember as you do that. The president should be the one who's running all the PTA meetings. And if they're not able to be there, they should appoint someone else to preside in their place. Usually this is your vice president, or if you have multiple vice presidents, this might be your executive vice president. Or in your bylaws, sometimes you'll see first VP, and then you might give it a certain type of area of focus. So you can look there for some suggestions, but the president would appoint somebody to run a meeting if they are not doing it. Big piece of advice for you if you're running just a board meeting or a regular general membership meeting is just to be prepared. So get that agenda together, solicit items for the agenda from your board in a good amount of time in advance. I think it's a great thing to be talking about at a board meeting that happens before the next general meeting so that you can get that published and everybody feels like they know what their job is. Make sure you send that agenda in advance so that everyone else can be prepared for discussions and actions too. So if they see that you're going to be approving the budget, they want to be able to see the budget so they can ask informed questions before they come to that meeting for a vote. Or if you're voting on some other program you want to start at your school, make sure it's on the agenda in advance so people know that they want to talk about it, just like we do in public meetings, like in our school board meetings. They have to send out their agendas, 72 hours in advance, and any of us can go and look and see what items are on that agenda in case we want to provide comment on them. So it's a similar approach in your own PTA, and then stick to the agenda. If you go off of the agenda, then people might miss out on a conversation they really wanted to be a part of. So you can have a section on your agenda that's new business that people can suggest items they would like to bring on the next agenda. And they can always contact you, of course, but anything for sort of member discussion, make sure it's on the agenda. Make sure that you are respecting people's time. Everybody's really busy. They have jobs and families and all kinds of things. So start and end that meeting on time. I think it's a great idea to provide some value in your meetings, both in your board meetings and in your general meetings, to provide value so people feel like it was worth their time and they weren't just voting on things that are just business items on the financial reports and the minutes. So maybe you want to find out what kind of guest speakers your members would be interested in, if you bring staff at your school to talk about things happening in the school, or if there's a particular topic people are interested in, maybe mental health is a big issue right now, bring in speakers so that your members can learn as they come to your meetings. Make sure you know basic parliamentary procedure and rely on your parliamentarian. If you don't have one, just know the basics yourself, or as Melissa said, you can appoint somebody. There's a lot of resources on the California PTA website about what kinds of procedures you need to be familiar with. I would suggest that you also set some community agreements or meeting norms. So this is, how do you want to interact with each other? It might include things like one person speaking at a time, step up, step back. If you notice you're somebody who's speaking a lot, that you also step back so that others who aren't are able to speak, things like that. For those membership meetings, going back to the agenda, there is a sample agenda on capta.org. You can check there. And then keep your meetings centered on your PTA's goals and the PTA purpose and mission, which we've talked about a lot already today, which is keeping students at the center and supporting them for success. And really, we look at the whole child in the PTA, academics, but everything else that affects their physical, mental health and well-being. Okay, this is also really important, meeting with your principal. Your principal serves on your executive board, and it's important that you're meeting regularly together with them to plan and to keep one another aware of the priorities and activities at the school. I would recommend that you're meeting with your principal at least once a month. Hopefully they are able to come to your executive board meetings. If not, to assign someone else in their stead. Maybe there's an assistant principal who would be there, but you want them to be a close partner with you. They are responsible for your school. They're held accountable for what happens at your school. And so we hope that they're your partner. Be aware that as you send communications out to your school, your principal should see them. Any activities you want to plan, your principal should not be the last person to find out about it. You want to make sure they're a partner in those kinds of communication. And if you can communicate that partnership, it will help build the unity and cohesiveness as a school. We have several links that we'll send out after this meeting about how administrators and PTAs can work together, resources and assessment that you can use for your PTA and your principal to see how well you're doing at that. So watch for those. And then you also want to set some goals. Yvette talked a little bit about our goals at the Second District, and hopefully you all are thinking about some goals that you can set at your own PTA. This might be a way to set goals that you are familiar with, perhaps in other organizations you've been a part of or through your job. You want to make your goals SMART. That means that they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So you want to, there's notes here that you can see. You want to talk about who is doing what and why you're doing it. Try to make it as unambiguous as possible, so that it's very clear what you're trying to do. And measurable. Can you tell when it's done? Is there a way to measure the progress? Is there a certain number? Maybe you're wanting to hold, for instance, maybe your goal is we want to build community through activities throughout the year. And so maybe you're going to say, we want to hold 5 community events this year. And so you would make sure that is included in your goal. And is that realistic? Is this achievable or attainable? Well, let's see, if you've got 9 months in the school year, 5 activities, if they're not super involved, is probably possible. So you can, that's a question to ask yourself. And relevant, building community in a time like this. Yeah, super relevant, building community in schools where there's lots of emotions and lots of things happening. Okay, that's probably a relevant goal and helping us to build trusting relationships across the school. And then timely, that's an example of a goal that would be very timely right now, as we have all been apart from each other during the pandemic for the last 18 months. But frankly, even if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, that would be an important thing to accomplish. So if you make your goals explicit and you work on them with your board and your members, it helps make sure everybody's swimming in the same direction. It helps everybody come together and not just have different ideas about what it is the PTA is trying to do. You can post these on your website. You could put them on your agendas to remind people. I would recommend you not choose more than 3 or 4 goals, because it's really hard to remember more than 3 or 4 goals, and you don't want to forget what it is you're trying to do. All right, this is a really important skill as a leader. Why would you want to delegate out to other people? Well, as I mentioned before, if you want the organization to keep going when you're not in your role anymore, you've got to divide up the job. You can have very small positions and roles for people to take on different things. It will save your sanity. Do not try to be a superhero. You don't want to be burnt out after a couple of years and then not want to be engaged at all with the PTA or the school anymore because you gave so much. So spreading the work across a lot of people makes everybody less likely to burn out. And it's more likely to create future leaders as you're thinking about who's going to replace you next year, or when your term is over. Maybe you're thinking you might do 2 terms if your membership votes you in that way. You want to be thinking about who your replacement might be. And so that will help create future leaders. And it's way more fun to be working with other people than just by yourself. Oh, for the most part. So, okay. All right, so this is also an important part of your job as a president, but also for the full board, is following the money in your PTA. So a few points here. PTA officers and board members are PTA fiduciaries. A fiduciary is a legal and ethical relationship of trust, and PTA members, supporters, and donors trust your PTA officers and board members to prudently carry out the purposes of PTA. You see those in your bylaws, to protect the assets of the organization, including the cash, the physical property, the volunteers, and importantly, the PTA's reputation. It's the board's job to disperse assets to meet the needs of children and members served by the PTA, to comply with federal, state, and local laws, and to ensure that the association remains transparent, Make sure you're getting that information out there, that everybody knows what you're doing. And also, as I've mentioned already a couple of times, to ensure the continuity of the association. Only a highly trusted PTA member may serve as a PTA fiduciary. So your entire board needs to be trusted by your members. All right, the number 2 thing in managing that money is the budget process. If you have not done this yet, form a budget committee now to look at last year's budget, determine what is needed this year to advance the goals that you just set, those SMART goals, and how much money you'll be likely to spend based on maybe how much you raised last year or the year before. Last year was kind of a funny year with everybody remote. And then draft a budget that you can share with the board. And in one of these first meetings, if you haven't had it yet, you want to bring that budget to your membership for a vote. You also want to vote to release the funds, and Sheila might mention this later in her presentation, but you want to actually also have a vote to release the funds so you can actually spend the money that you put into your budget. All right, the next thing is that as a president, you are a check signer. There are 2 other check signers designated in your bylaws, and that does not include the secretary, because they're the one keeping the minutes. They're the one approving, keeping track of what has been approved to spend. And so you have different signers than your secretary. The president is also on the hook for signing any contracts or payment authorizations that you might be presented with in your PTA. And then importantly, do not leave all the responsibility around finances to your treasurer. You should be familiar with how money and finances work for your PTA, and take some of that responsibility. And plus, for transparency and just general checks and balances and making sure there's accountability with PTA funds, you don't want only one person knowing what's going on. Okay, knowing your resources. Here's a few of my favorites. We've mentioned several times today, capta.org. There's so many things here. Just go searching around if you have a few minutes, just so you know what might be there when you run into a question. There's a search bar. You can also just search a key term if you're trying to find an answer, but you will find a lot there. You can go to our website, which is sfpta.org. We have a lot of resources for individual officer positions, but we also will put all of our training resources. So after this event, for instance, you'll see the links to anything related to this training, the recordings, the resources, the slide decks, and any other calendar items. When we hold our 411 meetings, you'll see all of that there. The toolkit is something the state PTA put together that is a more sort of, I would call it an evergreen type of a document that gives you the how-tos, what all the different job positions are, the basics of doing those. And you'll see that also on capta.org. Your bylaws are a great resource, as you already heard from Melissa. Lots of your questions that we regularly get asked, you can find the answers to in your bylaws. So take a minute to review those with your whole board. The loss and prevention guide, a couple of people have mentioned in the chat. There's a new one every year, and it gives you guidance about what is covered by insurance and what isn't covered. There's a really fantastic red, yellow, green list that tells you which things are approved through insurance, which things might be approved if you have certain other paperwork filled out, or if the activity is a certain way. And then the red list is things that are absolutely not ever covered by insurance. And there's a lot of other information in that guide, and you should have received that already. If you haven't, let us know. And we can get you a link online as well. ed100.org is not specifically a PTA thing, but we work very closely with ed100.org. This is a very accessible website that is designed to help parents and community members, but really parents understand how California's education system works. So if you're wondering how funding works, how special education works. If you're wondering anything in general about education, go there. And the language is not super academic. It's meant to be very accessible to people who are not experts in this. So check that out. All right, communicating. You probably already all know how important this is, but you want to make sure that your communication works for your community. You want to choose the format and the platform that works best. That might be email, might be texting services or different apps. And don't forget to get those materials translated. You heard about a translation grant opportunity if you want to apply for that, or make sure that you have a little bit of funds in your own budget. And you can also work with your school, because the school district will provide some translation interpretation services for you. You just need to work with them to do the request. So let us know if you don't get the information you need from your principal about how to do that. You want to keep your emails and communications brief but useful. If you make very, very long emails, people will not be likely to read the whole thing. When you are sending emails, also be very careful about copies and blind copies, BCCs. We've all had that accidental reply all with a sassy comment that was only meant for the sender, but everybody saw it. So don't say anything in an email also that you wouldn't actually say live to someone. Don't CC everyone on in your school on an email, because some people may not want their email shared. They might want it private. So, and then some people will do reply all to that. And then you have a whole chain of a lot of emails going to a lot of people. So be really careful with that. Be timely and make sure that you're sending timely information to your board, the full PTA, and the community. Be as transparent as you can. That is something that will build trust, which we always could use more of in our communities. Consider the topics that you cover in emails. If it's sensitive or contentious in nature, it might be misinterpreted in writing. So I would advise you to pick up the phone instead. Similarly, humor and sarcasm don't often play out well with text only. And so you might save those more nuanced conversations for live face-to-face. All right, and then the approvals, I just want to remind you again that nothing should go out in a PTA newsletter or handout without your approval as president. And of course, you don't want to micromanage, or volunteers will never come back to your PTA, but just make sure you do a quick read through the newsletters, for instance, that we send out to you every week. I draft those with input and requests from people all across our board, and then Melissa takes a quick look at that before I send it out to you. And also your principal should be able to review anything going home in folders or, through students. All right. You should, as I mentioned before, you're the coordinator of the work, but you want to build this infrastructure to support the work after you leave. So as soon as you're elected, as soon as you were elected in the spring, or if you're just starting your job now, start thinking about who could serve after you. Find a few people who seem interested in the kind of work you're doing in your role, whether you're president or a different role on the board. Think about people who work well with others, who have a lot of leadership potential. They don't have to be experts and good at every single thing, but who really is there for good reasons, who believe in the mission of PTA, who'd be good representative of your membership, and invite you to join them in your work. Encourage their leadership and bring them along whenever you can. Encourage them to join committees and to be part of the work and to learn how PTA works, so that they are somebody who might be able to come next after. And then finally, you have to think about your PTA currency. We are not paid people in the PTA. And so our currency is appreciation. So it's really important to say it a lot. And you might think some people's positions, like they're just doing their job, and so it's fine, they don't need to be thanked. That is absolutely not true. They say thank you as much as you can, as genuinely as you can. Any volunteer who shows up to even give a half an hour of time, whether that's virtually or in person, say thank you. Anybody who is helping and feels appreciated is more likely to come back. So use that. A few other tips that don't fit in that list of 10. It's as you have the exiting board, acknowledge their good past work, because we're all building on people who came before us. So thank them for the work they did. Do lots of listening and learning. Motivate folks, tell them how much you appreciate them. Delegate, as I said, make sure you follow through. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you're not sure you're going to be able to get to it, don't commit to doing it, because follow through is a big part of building trust. If you make a mistake, take responsibility for that. It's okay. We all make mistakes, and you'll earn a lot of respect if you can say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, or I'm sorry, that didn't work out or didn't feel good. And, and I will do better. It's an important part of good leadership, I think, also. And then again, just keep it all about the kids. Are there any questions? I have not been monitoring the chat, but let's see if there's anything that we need to check. Maybe people can raise your hand and I can call on you if you have a question to ask out loud, if they haven't already been answered in the chat. And as a reminder, if people are coming in, we'll send out links to recordings of all these in the slide decks. So don't worry if you didn't miss anything. Okay, I am not seeing any questions. And so I believe, if I remember correctly, that we are heading into a short break. Is that?
Yeah, we have a 11:15 to 11:25, so we're actually back on track. And
Oh, good. So why don't we just go ahead and take a break then until 11:25? So you've got actually a 15-minute break if you need to go grab some food, stretch your legs, take a quick walk around wherever you are. And we will start back right at 11:25 on the dot with a presentation Jessica and I will be doing about creating communities of belonging, and it will be interactive. So we're looking forward to seeing you back in 15 minutes.